Clyde Berman lifted up the right sleeve of his black coat and checked his watch. The cold October wind greeted his paper-colored skin with ferocity. Clyde let out a series of shivers as he noted the time before pulling his sleeve back down. 5:42 p.m. Good. It should be ready, Clyde muttered to himself. The wind continued to rush against Clyde as he made his way toward the destination that he intended upon being life-changing for him. He crossed his arms in response as he walked forward with the hope that he wouldn't become a human popsicle. His hopes were seemingly answered as he arrived at his target, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. Various glass display cases greeted him, as did a wide variety of pendants, bracelets, rings, and earrings. The display cases were spread out in no discernible order, at least to Clyde. And a counter with the Ring in the Rough's owner parked behind it was located at the far end of the store, which caused Clyde to question the wisdom of the store's layout even more. Look who showed up just before closing time. I told you that the ring would be ready at 5:30, Mr. Berman, spoke the chubby, suited man behind the counter in a clearly false English accent. Not all of us can afford a car, Jeffrey, although I have an idea on how I might be able to pay for one. Berman replied in a sarcastic tone while delivering a glare before shifting his gaze at the various displays, as if to imply that he might rob the jewelry store. Jeffrey Dursk let out a nervous laugh as Clyde approached, while he retrieved a small jewelry box from behind the counter. Clyde gently picked the box from Jeffrey's hand and opened it. He was greeted by a 10-carat white gold diamond ring. Clyde gave Jeffrey a thumbs up as he placed the box on the counter and fished out a little over $2,000 in cash. Have a nice day. I know I will, Jeffrey responded after counting the wad of cash. Clyde rolled his eyes, put the box with the ring inside of it into his coat, and strolled out the door. Might as well go buy a pack of blues. I already spent everything else, he stated to himself as the wind ran through his brown hair in a way of greeting. Although not a long walk to the Quick Trip, Clyde still dreaded it. The town was usually bustling with cars and pedestrians at this hour, but today he was practically the only soul out on the streets. Damn wind. This is entirely optional, you know. Don't be a wuss about something that's your own fault, he chided himself within his thoughts. 5 minutes of walking later, and the glass door to the red-colored Quick Trip building was in front of him. Clyde's brown hair and a winter coat trailed in the wind as the Quick Trip door struggled valiantly against his mighty grip. The wind and door combined were no match for Berman's strength as he heaved the door open and set off the buzzer as he entered the shop. Both the long-haired, glasses-wearing clerk and the bald, blue-eyed customer stared at him silently as he approached the counter. Crap, do I still have some marinara sauce on my face? Hopefully I just interrupted a conversation and it isn't anything embarrassing. I'll try to get out of here quickly, he thought as he met their gazes and continued his approach. Yo, I'd like a pack of blues if you aren't waiting on him. He is, spoke the customer in an uneven voice. The customer turned his body to face Clyde, and for the first time Clyde noticed that the man was twitching. He also noticed the small handgun that had been tucked underneath the man's coat. Clyde looked the gunman dead in the eye. "Give me your wallet," he stated matter-of-factly. "My date just took a trip to Shitsville," Clyde muttered. A loud bang materialized and a bullet embedded itself in the wall behind Clyde. The tweaker meant business. Okay, I'm getting it," he responded in a startled tone as he stuffed his hand into his right pocket and carefully tried to fish out his wallet without bringing up the boxed engagement ring. Not satisfied, the mugger fired a second round. "Not enough time," Clyde managed to respond as he hit the floor face first with a thud. A small bit of blood leaked out and around his head as he faded out of consciousness. His failing vision picked up on the shooter running out the door, and then a beautiful young woman with long red hair, who was arguably the shyest person in all of Laynard, Virginia, sat outside of the operating room with her hands delicately clasped in her lap as she stared down at the hospital's white-tiled floor. Eventually, people stopped rushing in and out of the ER, and an elderly female nurse who was wrapped in green approached the young woman. "Ma'am?" Yes?" the redhead asked in a gentle voice, as she brought her fingers to her blue eyes in an effort to wipe away the tears. "Mr. Berman is going to be all right. Would you like to see him now?" The woman clumsily stood up, nearly falling as she did so, and nodded in reply. The emergency room was a pristine white. Walls, floor, ceiling. The machines beeping and humming were the only sounds that dared occupy the room. Clyde Berman lay on a bed hooked to machines and doodads of all shapes, sizes, and sorts that were dedicated to keeping his condition stable. The two women approached the blanket-covered man whose head was covered in medical wrap and an oxygen mask. Clyde's brown eyes effortlessly scrolled over to Annie Prask and the nurse. Annie fought back a gasp. She was resolved to do her best not to hurt Clyde in any way. "It's not as bad as it might look. I've heard the doctors say that he fought that bullet really well," the nurse said in a reassuring tone before Annie could speak to Clyde. One of the doctors, a young male, barged into the room. The weight behind the doctor's steps indicated that he was most displeased, a fact which was backed by his voice. "What is she doing in here? No one is allowed in the ER. You should know this, Marge," came the doctor's gravely and somewhat shaky voice. "I'm sorry, Dr. Onik. She's been waiting outside the entire duration of the surgery. She sat there like a statue. I figured she deserved to know now." "Have you told her?" "No." The doctor let out a sigh as he rubbed in between his eyebrows with his right thumb and index finger. After completing the somewhat insensitive motion, he turned to face Annie and cleared his throat. "Well, miss, as you probably know, a bullet traveled through Mr. Berman's head, which in turn means his brain. On the positive side, there shouldn't be any memory loss, decrease in intelligence or motor functions based on the bullet's trajectory. However, the bullet traveled through the brain in such a chance-based way that it took out most of the emotional centers of the brain before lodging itself in the hypothalamus, where it still resides due to the risk that removal posed. In short, Clyde may have some trouble feeling and expressing emotion." Annie stood limply as she listened to Dr. Onik's explanation. Tears did not well up in her eyes, as would have been normal procedure for her upon receiving bad news. Instead, in this instance, she stood there in shock, with both her hands opening and closing as if to grasp for hope, if only such a thing had a physical form. "See her out, Marge. It's nearly time to move Mr. Berman to ICU. Oh, and send these home with her," continued Anik in a cold tone, as he handed the nurse a plastic sack that contained the clothes and effects that were on Clyde Berman when he had been shot. Ever so delicately, Marge put a hand on Annie's left shoulder and helped guide her out of the room. "Why don't you go home and get some rest, dearie? You must be tired and feeling awful. It's not going to do him any good. Would you like me to call a transit bus?" Marge asked as she patiently held out the bag of Berman's effects. Tears hit the floor as Annie nodded and grasped the bag. The rest happened in a blur, and before Annie knew it, she was back home, although it didn't feel as such with the absence of her beloved. Annie opened the sack and took out the clothes with trembling hands. She absent-mindedly sniffed the bloodied shirt and took in the coppery smell, hesitating before tossing it and the ruined coat in the kitchen trash can. Although a horrible reminder of what had occurred, she found the smell of her boyfriend's blood to be somewhat soothing, much to her surprise and dismay. "It must be because that's all of him that I can currently have," she justified to herself. The blue jeans appeared to be unspoiled, which caused her to bring them over to the laundry basket. She checked the pockets, as was customary, and retrieved Clyde's keys from the left pocket. The contents of the right pocket caught her off guard. As expected, she found his wallet. Unexpectedly, she pulled out a jewelry box. Annie fumbled and dropped the box with her shaky hands. It hit with a thud and the top opened. A beautiful engagement ring revealed itself before Annie's eyes, and a realization hit her. He was going to propose. A wave of worry about the future hit her as another geyser of tears burst forth and trailed down her face as she stood shaking like a bag caught in a tornado. The sounds of air compressing and decompressing and machines that beeped and booped greeted Clyde as he awakened from a restless slumber in his hospital bed. He brought both his arms up to his head and felt around. His face was unwrapped until he reached the top of his head. "I guess I could wear a hat if the wound is gnarly," thinking to himself. That's all Clyde did for hours. It was all he could do to keep himself entertained and perhaps even sane. Eventually, Annie showed up. Clyde's mind told him that he should be grateful, but he felt nothing. Emotionless. At least she could help him kill time. Each day the two chatted back and forth about how much time had passed, when Clyde might be discharged, how the hospital food tasted, and other matters similar to those. However, one thing did not get brought up, and that was the engagement ring. Annie always found herself saddened by the lack of emotion that her boyfriend exhibited, but she always kept a smile on and would urge the conversations onward with her quiet voice. After a few days, the wrap was removed from Clyde's head, and he found that it left a nice scar. However, it didn't look so bad, at least to him. Around a week into his hospital stay, he learned to walk again, while Annie quietly laughed and referred to him as looking like a newborn fawn. On day 13, Clyde was discharged. As the couple walked out the door holding hands and onto the hospital grounds, a young surgeon who had operated on Clyde was heading to work, noticed and called out to them as he walked. "Glad to see you beat the machine. We were worried for a short while that you might be a vegetable. Take care." Clyde turned his head and looked as the young surgeon walked through the sliding doors and back into the hospital. "I beat the machine," he muttered to himself. He sure didn't feel like it, although he guessed that being alive was worth something, even if he had a difficult time feeling any emotions. "What was that?" Annie inquired, obviously not hearing him. "It was nothing," he replied, as they continued to step aboard the transit bus.